session number, and it will come up for you. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers this evening. We are blessed to have Reverend C.J. Wright, Executive Director, Rainbow Spiritual Education Center, as well as Dr. Dennis Naiman, PhD. They will be joining Dr. John Bush as they give the third presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya, and welcome, everybody. We have been talking about how people can go to extremes. Normal people involve themselves into some really horrid stuff, and we've only half started the horrid stuff. We still have more to go. But because of scheduling people who may not be in the country at the time that they're needed, we're going to go ahead with looking at things we can do about this, particularly tonight at the individual and personal level. So let me go ahead and invite Reverend Wright to come right now and thank you.
Good evening. How are you? Everybody doing okay? I'm doing good on purpose. Don't you like that? I stole that from an instructor several years ago. She said it to me, and I said, I like that. I think I'm going to steal it. She said, go ahead, I did. I said, okay. But I'm actually going to refer back to that because we've got to be purposeful about how we're doing sometimes, don't you think? Yeah. So, is this a scary topic? No? Okay. Well, good. Let's see if I can work on that. So, how did I get here? Well, I've had the pleasure of working with these gentlemen and several other people with the Salam Network, and it's a great group. And its purpose is to do educational programs to help people dispel with myths of varying kinds. I don't know if you can see the fine print there. I am a certified trauma responder and trauma services specialist, certified in critical incident stress management. I can teach many classes worldwide in the stuff that will teach people how to deal with crises and disasters and terrorism and how it impacts us on a psychosocial level. Now, several years ago when I got into this, I was hired by the state of Kentucky, or Commonwealth of Kentucky, and the Kentucky Community Crisis Response Board, which is under a division under the Kentucky Department of Military Affairs. And my job title was Bioterrorism Program Coordinator. Now, I knew a lot at that point in my life, but I didn't know anything about bioterrorism. This was within a year after 9/11. And so it was learning on the run, basically. 2 months after I started the job, I ended up going with the director to Baltimore and for a World Congress of the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. So get to Baltimore, get into this hotel room on the Baltimore Bay. Beautiful. Anybody ever been there? It's gorgeous. And I've got a big window looking out on the bay, and I'm going to be there for 4 days. I thought, okay. So I unpacked my suitcase and had the curtains open, and then I decided I'd just sit on the bed and check some news out. Well, the news came on, and they started talking about a terrorist threat. And it was to the World Trade Center in the Baltimore Bay. And they're showing this building, and I'm looking at the TV, and then I look over here, and I see the building. Okay, and then they say, and there's these other threats, and they're naming this, and I see it, and I look over here. Then they name the hotel. that there's been, because there are people here from all over the world, and a lot of heavy hitters, a lot of police, fire, EMS, and I'm thinking, oh crap. And I'm there to take a couple of classes, all right? So I'm considering, all right, I've got my suitcase unpacked. I'm on the 7th floor. I've got to go to these classes. Well, I don't know if I want to carry my suitcase around, so I grab my backpack and I put essentials in it. Because at this point, who knows what's going to happen? And so for the next 4 days, I carried the essentials in my book backpack to and from class in case I needed to get out of Dodge quick. Sounds like something you'd do, right? Then I go into one of the classes and I'm sitting with next to a woman who is an agent for what is it? The alcohol, tobacco, and ATF. And she's getting these reports of these terrorist threats on the property. And I'm going, okay, what do we need to do here? Well, nothing yet, because didn't know if it was for real. But it makes your mind go. So basically where I ended up, was carrying what I thought I might need if I needed to get out of the hotel. Then I put a car on reserve in case I couldn't get to the airport. And that was enough. I felt, okay, I've taken some steps, and I felt better about taking those steps. That's what I did for me. And my psychological first aid, my psychological wellness at that point. So, what I want to talk about is exactly that, preparing for that kind of thing. And this is where we are collectively tonight. We're in the preparation stage. You are here because you're here. You're in the preparation stage. You've already thought more about the impact of hate and terrorism than a lot of people because of being here. If this is your first time tonight, you thought about it, that process that you went through to think about getting here is a preparation. So if there was a disaster, if something happened, a tornado came through, hopefully you've got stuff prepared. If the power goes out in the middle of the winter, hopefully you have stuff prepared. Every class I've taught in the last 15 years, I told them, make sure you've got your stuff ready. Food, ways to cook, the different emergency things you might need. If you haven't done that, go to Red Cross's site, Kentucky Emergency Management site, and you can find a list of things that are good for you to have ready. For the most part, you won't have to go out and buy stuff, just have some stuff together that if you need it, you've got it. In the wintertime, I have a fireplace, I have gas heat, gas stove, so I've got a couple of ways to cook. Now, in the fireplace, I gotta have wood for that, right? So when it says that we're gonna get ice or snow, I decide I'm gonna check, make sure I've got enough wood. As I go into winter, I buy more charcoal and charcoal fluid for my grill. If you have a propane tank, buy a propane tank for the winter. Why would you want to do that? To be prepared. Yeah. You could cook on that. You can't drag it into the house and heat the house. Don't do that. But you could cook. So when I hear warnings like that, oh, we're getting this weather, I stop and think, all right, have I got everything I need? Yeah. Any stress I might have felt takes a nosedive because I'm prepared. This is true for everything. If we go on a road trip, make sure you have emergency stuff with you. Doesn't that make sense? It is just common sense. Excuse me. So, All of that is directly related to this. In disasters and terrorism, oftentimes we have a lot of the same reactions. The differences between disasters and terrorism, disasters are somewhat expected. We're also much more forgiving of Mother Nature, right? And people work together. With terrorism, it's unexpected. The whole purpose behind a terroristic act is to scare the beheebie-jeebies out of people. Okay? It also can impact our core values. And it creates a sense of distrust because somebody purposely wanted to hurt someone. So our distrust meter goes up, and our core values, we're set in our core values by about the age of 8. And some of those are, it's safe here. My home is safe. This land is safe. Nobody wants to hurt me. Collectively, those of us that were here and aware on September 11th, 2001, our core values were shook. Because all of a sudden, it wasn't safe anymore, was it? We didn't know what was safe. We had all kinds of reactions to that. How many of you, as soon as I say September 11th, 2001, can see exactly where you were at that moment? Yeah. That's always going to be with us. We're never, ever going to get rid of that imprint because it hit us to our core, literally. What we have done since then is learned how to peacefully coexist with the memory of that. And we've all done something to try to be better prepared for things when they take us by such surprise. Case in point, all of us being here tonight. With disasters and terrorism, there are phases and reactions in each of the phases that can kind of tell you where you are in the phase. Initially, that acute phase, people are in denial, they're in shock, disbelief. A lot of us stared at the TV for hours because we just couldn't believe what we were hearing, what we were seeing. This couldn't have happened. Did it? But it did. And we couldn't believe it. We were in shock. The intermediate phase, we start feeling the fear and anxiety, have difficulty paying attention. How many people had difficulty paying attention at work or school for a week to a month after that? If you remember. We were kind of disjointed. We didn't know what to expect. Long-term phase, where you come to terms with realities. And every year there's anniversaries. Every September 11th, we reflect back to what took place then. Anniversaries are also a time for us to reflect on us and how we've grown and how we've come to take better care of ourselves in the face of a disaster or an event like 9/11. So when September 11th rolls around, pat yourself on the back because you've done some things to make sure that you have a better grip on what's happening and what you can do to take good care of yourself and your family. The impact of terrorism is going to hit us on a lot of different levels. We think about ourselves sometime as just a cognitive being. It's just going to hit us here, or it's going to hit us in our heart. Well, it also is going to impact us physically, behaviorally, and spiritually. I don't know if you've ever read anything by Gary Zukav, Seed of the Soul, and several other books, but he talks about how we are not human beings trying to be spiritual, we're spiritual beings trying to be human. Now, I'm not going to go and put my Rev hat on and go into a spiritual spew, okay? But what I will tell you is all of us are made up of these aspects. When something impacts us physically, we fall and break our arm, break our leg, something like that, hit our head. We're impacted also mentally, emotionally, behaviorally, and spiritually at different degrees of impact. But you can't have one without the other. Now, when I say spiritual, I'm not talking about our religion. I'm talking about, depending on your point of view, that which drives us and informs us. Okay? That's what I mean by that. So some of the immediate reactions, and it's important to understand these things because we may realize that we're experiencing some of this, or that somebody we know, somebody in our family is experiencing some of this. Now, I also want to say that these are true if you've had a personal crisis, somebody's been in an accident, something like that. A lot of these reactions are true with just about any kind of thing that takes you to that acute crisis state. So sleep disturbances, not uncommon. Some people have nightmares. Jumpiness, edginess. Avoidance of reminders, not going by a place. I remember when the church across the street burned down. And if that had impacted me in a very adverse way, maybe I would avoid even going by there. So avoidance of reminders. Increased substance use. That happens. We self-medicate sometimes. Emotionally, that shock, disbelief that we hit initially, a certain numbness, different levels of anxiety, and re-experiencing the pain. With our thought processes, anytime that we are in crisis, it almost always will impact us cognitively to a point where we may, our memory, we may have some memory loss. And I don't mean like I do now when I go in the kitchen and say, why did I come in here? You ever have that happen? What did I come in here for? It's that confusion, that memory loss, all of a sudden it's kicked up a bit. Can't concentrate on things. Somebody says, you want to go get something to eat? Yeah, I guess. What do you want? I don't know. I don't know. Now, if that's our normal, then that's our normal. But if it's not our normal, then we may feel like, why can't I think of something? Why can't I remember why I came in here? And we'll start beating ourselves up, wondering what's wrong with me, when what's really wrong is we just went through a tough situation. And it's impacting us. And it's good to know, oh, okay, I see, it's impacting me. The repeated flashbacks, hypervigilance. I know I was very hypervigilant after 9/11. I was really hypervigilant after Baltimore for a while. Physically, we might experience chest pains. Any doctors here? Medical doctors? What is that angina when it's like from anxiety? Anybody know? Okay. High blood pressure, rapid heart rate, stomach aches. We forget to breathe. You ever hold your breath when you're kind of shook up or tense? Not a good idea. I recommend breathing on a regular basis. Okay? It's a good idea. May even get a little dizzy, something like that. Headaches, grinding teeth. You get the idea. These are all things that we might start experiencing that we didn't experience before that event occurred. Now, why is this important? because it gives us an opportunity to check in with. Spiritually, we may feel an emptiness, a loss of meaning, doubt in that higher power that we may subscribe to, um, feeling punished, feeling like the world's going to come to an end, and even go into a crisis of faith. These are some of the reactions that can happen in that acute phase. Media exposure, is there a problem with that? Um, the young people that are in here, do you remember 9/11? Okay, you've heard about it. Do you remember the shooting at Parkland School? Was that terrorism? Yes, it was. And the feelings that we all felt, a lot of people worldwide that we all felt about Parkland and that tragedy, are very similar to what we felt with not only 9/11 but other terrorist events. Media exposure can saturate us so much that we really get off base with the reality in our lives. We need to know what's going on, and for that, the media is good. But once we found out what's going on, what do I need to know, what should I do, what should my family do, then we need to turn that off. I have a practice, if I check in with the news in the morning, and then I check in again in the evening if there's been something that's gone on so I can catch up on that. But to sit and watch it all day long, it's not healthy. So try not to do that in any kind of situation. Lack of preparation is one of the worst things that we can do as a human being living on this earth. And as I started out talking about the be prepared, and we're at that preparation stage, if we stop and think, if there is an accident, if there's an incident, if there is a crisis, how will I respond? What will I need? And we go through that mental exercise, if you will. And then we maybe get some things in place. We maybe have a book. This is what I need to do. We have our family plans of where are we going to meet if we can't go home. We're going to feel a whole lot better when a disaster strikes, when an event happens, because we've already visited it. We've already thought about it. If we need help, or a family member needs help getting out of the home if there's a problem, to think that through ahead of time. Perhaps you'll never ever need that preparation, but wouldn't you rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it? Yeah. So, what do we do to take care of ourselves? These are things that daily are going to make a big impact overall. Eating a healthy diet. There are certain things that our body needs in order to function well. And if we don't help it out, then we're going to have problems. Anybody else get really hot and react to heat like I do? Well, if we sweat too much, we can really get our electrolytes out of whack. And then we can't think right. All those things that we saw in reactions, our body starts going through that. Just because we let our electrolytes get all out of whack. So we want to make sure that we're doing the things, hydrating, making sure we're doing the things we need to do. Now, I'm not going to preach, tell you don't use drugs and alcohol. Aleve is my friend. Everything in moderation. And things like alcohol, they're not going to take care of a problem. Exercise, walking, stretching, whatever that means for each of us. Deep breathing. Now I want you to breathe with me for a minute. Do you know how to breathe? Okay, this is how we breathe when we want to slow our system down. You want to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Let's do that 3 times, kind of slow together. Ready? Doing it. I caught you. Are you holding your breath? Okay. All right, now if you just did that, what you did was you slowed down your heart rate just with those 3 breaths. Slowed down your heart rate just a tad, lowered your blood pressure just a tad, and got more oxygen to your brain. Are these good things? Yeah. When you encounter a crisis, something that has shaken you up, news that got to you that is unfavorable, do those slow, deep breaths. Somebody gets on your last nerve, and you want to tell them what for. Take a slow, deep breath before you do that. Get some oxygen to your brain so you don't put your foot in your mouth. Driving down the highway, inside lane. Grandpa Gerald is in the inside lane going 40. He's 6 years older than God. He's not going to move for anybody. You're trying to get someplace, it's on your last nerve, and you're thinking of all kinds of ways you can respond and react to him, right? Breathe. Just breathe. You'll feel better. He'll be safer. You'll both be safer. Avoid making major life decisions at once when you've experienced a disaster. Okay? Crisis. A terrorist threat. Something that's really rocked your world. Avoid making major decisions like buying a house, getting married, buying a car, spending a lot of money on something. Try to get some good sleep. Understand that there will be changes. In doing all of this, one of the things that we can do is build our resilience. We are a resilient people. We have that capacity. It helps us keep things in perspective. So we want to have a plan to where we can not only help ourselves, but be able to help others. And while we're at it, talk to a friend, a neighbor, your relatives about getting them to have a plan. Do you have a plan? No. Well, here. I talked to this really smart lady, went to this thing, and she said, you ought to have a plan. And you should. Keep connected. That resilience helps us to bounce back. And it's a tool that will help us in any kind of anxiety. Now, another thing that you could do is take a class in psychological first aid. Anybody here take first aid from Red Cross or someplace? How many people have taken CPR training? Okay. Have you done the new training in the last few years? How many compressions are we doing now? Yeah. I do remember that. Just like that kind of training, you can get psychological first aid training. Red Cross does it. The KCCRB, which is the agency I work for, I retired from there in December. You can go to the website, they teach classes. You can also go to the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and that's there. They have an online class. It takes about 6 hours. If you are a mental health professional, you can get CEUs for that class. If you just want to get your certificate of completion, it'll tell you what tests to take at the end. It's really good. And it'll give you some of the things that can not only help you, but help people around you. Place that you can get some good information is through SAMHSA. And if you just put in SAMHSA, there is a research bulletin there. If you really like research, the mass violence and behavioral health is excellent. But you can go there and put in psychological first aid, search for it, and they've got tools, they've got reactions, some of the reactions people go through, and what you can do about those reactions. Okay? So there's things at your fingertips that won't cost you a dime to get that extra tool in your toolkit. Why does that matter? Well, you may be the person that helps another person survive a tragedy, a crisis, or a terrorist event by simply having the right tools in your toolkit. Okay? American Psychological Association also has psychological first aid things. Now, going through some personal tragedies in my own life about 8 years ago, I discovered 3 truths, and I want to share those with you. And if you're taking notes, these would be good things to write. The first thing I learned, when you're walking along, minding your own business, life shows up. It does. Life shows up. The second thing I learned that was very helpful, it is what it is. It is what it is. Don't make more of it than what it is, because what it is probably enough. And the third wisdom piece from that, there's wisdom in the experience. I've put this to the test in many, many things. I have yet to find anything that's not true. There's always wisdom in the experience. There's something we can take from it that will prepare us better for something in the future, that helps us gain an understanding, that helps us know ourselves better. There's always some wisdom. Life shows up. It is what it is. What can I learn from this experience? That will go a long way to help us keep our poop in a group, if you would, so that we're not stressed out beyond belief. Now, is all this going to fix everybody? And a month after a disaster or a terrorist event, we're all fine and good? No. It's going to give us a good start. Most people, most of the time in a disaster, even something like terrorism, they're going to be okay. But some of the impact that we may experience can really hit us broadside and impact us for a while. So there's some other things that we can do to train ourselves to daily make an agreement with ourselves. This is how I'm going to look at the day. When somebody asks me how I am, I'm going to say I'm doing good on purpose, because I want my mindset. I'm trying to train my mindset that I'm purposely making a good day today. Okay? Well, there's other things like that, and Dr. Dennis is going to talk about those. I thank you for your time. I hope that this helps.
Thank you.
Okay, now we get to hear from Dr. Naiman.
Good evening. It's nice to be here with you. My name is Dennis Naiman. I thought I'd start out just telling you a little bit about who I am. I'm a problem solver, and I think a good subtitle for my presentation would be Explorations in Problem Solving. We are grateful to John for presenting the earlier workshops that gave you some insights on the varieties of hate and terrorist groups that have been in the news in the last few years. But tonight I'd like to be focusing a little bit more on how to respond to the heightened emotions and the damaging thoughts that go along with those dark events. One thing I'd like you to know is that I'd lived in Iran in the 70s. I was a teacher in Isfahan, a beautiful city in the middle of the country. So I was there when the Shah was in power, and then toward the end of my time, the revolution occurred, and the Ayatollah came back in and set up a new shop. I also want to say that I came of age as a child in the civil rights era and the Vietnam era. So I wanted to ask myself that question in front of you. What is terrorism to me? Having lived in Iran with wonderful people, but also in just staying alive in the Vietnam era. And the answer that came to me was that my first act of terrorism that I witnessed was the self-immolation of a Buddhist monk in Vietnam who was protesting government policies. To me, that shook me to the core. A person who felt so strongly about his beliefs that he was willing to die and hopefully change the government of South Vietnam. Another episode or event that I consider terroristic is as a child growing up in Florida in the 60s, the KKK was active. And my parents and friends were active in the civil rights movement. And I remember one night my parents were away and it was dark, and all of a sudden there was this bam, bam, bam sound. And I wasn't sure if it was shooting or what. And we called the police, my young brother and sister and I. We were probably 10 or 12, so we were inexperienced in the ways of the world. When the police came, they surmised that it was just firecrackers. But in my mindset, that was possibly somebody trying to frighten my parents or ourselves. So to me, terrorism is anybody that uses violence to intimidate or to advance their own interests. It could be the suicide bombers that we're familiar with from John's talk and from your lives in witnessing the news. It could be the alt-right, the neo-Nazis who are proposing threats of violence to intimidate and to bring about racial discord. And also for me as a retired teacher, school shooting is an act of terror. Even though it seems to be made up of individual acts that are relatively apolitical in the broader sense, still school shooters are doing that because of heightened emotions, disturbing thoughts. They feel like their needs are not being met. So what are the causes? What can we do about these incidences of terrorism? A question I have is, are terrorists rational? How do we respond to these destructive thoughts and the emotions that come about from terrorist activities? If a terrorist is rational, are they planfully saying, if I disrupt a school or a city council meeting or the Olympics, will that advance my cause? And tonight I'd like to be proposing some ways of thinking about whether we can respond to a person with heightened emotions and disturbed thoughts by responding rationally ourselves. One thing you're probably noticing is that in events around terrorism, there's a lot of anger and frustration. And I would maintain that each of us have had heightened emotions from one time or another because of personal lives that we have. A spouse may do something that makes us upset, and our emotion meter goes toward the 100, the danger zone. And also societal events that create some frustration. So tonight, let's think a little bit, if you would, about perhaps what's your problem? Would you like to lie on the couch and talk a little bit about what's bothering you? Maybe I can bring some respite to you. There are two events that I thought of that seem to be increasing emotions for people. I've seen in the news today even that families are not talking to each other because of the election. There's heightened positions being taken. You like them or you don't. And people are going to counselors because they want their children who are estranged because of recent events in politics to get back together and talk. So our world is changing because of the atmosphere. I would say that the election is, in some cases, ripping relationships apart. Some people have said that this resentment is just spreading not only among friends and family members, but all kinds of relationships. One way in my job as a teacher of students with emotional and behavior disorders, one way of measuring emotions was to use an emotions meter. And if you look at it closely, you can see on the left side 0 and on the right 100. And this is kind of like a speedometer for emotions. So at the 0 level, a person would say, oh, I'm just mildly disturbed. I'm in the no big deal zone from 0 to 20, for example. And as we get up to the right side from 80 to 100, that's the danger zone of emotions, when cognition, rational thinking is out the window and our hearts are thumping, our palms are sweaty, and we are highly emotional. So think about this visual as I proceed with the talk a little bit. Here's an example on a personal level. If someone makes fun of me, this subjective units of disturbance scale, this emotion meter, might show that between calm and 20, I'm a little uncomfortable. I'm still in the no big deal zone because of somebody making fun of me. My heartbeat is regular. I'm not really disturbed. But if I get more disturbed, I might feel embarrassed or up to the level of upset. So I'm using my vocabulary to discriminate between various levels of emotion. In the middle zone, between 20 and 80, it's labeled, I don't like it, but I can handle it. I'm not irrational. I'm not highly emotional. A little bit further on in that I don't like it zone, I might be humiliated. Now, humiliation is a strong emotion, but it's still something that a person might be able to handle. However, getting over to the mad and the boiling zone, again, that's the danger zone where thinking is out the window and emotions have taken over. So in the context of world terrorism, I would say that people who have chosen to commit acts of terror, blowing themselves up or blowing others up, have possibly entered that danger zone of emotions. And it might not be a sustained danger zone, but I'm thinking at some point in this cycle of violence, a person has gotten so upset that they have committed their life to changing it, to changing the world, to somehow getting rid of the problems. And unfortunately, they haven't voted, written a letter to the congressman, or any of those steps of democracy. Maybe they don't even have a democratic regime they're living in, and they feel that they have to do some of these ultimate acts of destruction to change the circumstances. What motivates jihadi terrorists or school shooters? Some writers have said that in the current world that these are the collateral damage of an increasingly resentful, angry, and cruelly narcissistic world, that we are alone in the world, that we're thinking only of ourselves, and that we have to act out to get our needs met. One of the responses to anger and disturbed thinking is a program that I've been using called clear thinking, talking back to the dark side. It's a way of managing emotions and then developing possible solutions. How can a person respond to those dangerous thoughts? Well, first of all, I think the emotions, or I know the emotions have to get down into the no big deal zone, or I can handle it. I don't like it, but I can handle it zone, so that thinking, clear thinking, can take place. Another step, once the emotions are at a reasonable level, is to conduct a cost-benefit analysis of possible solutions to the problem. So here in a nutshell are some of the steps to reducing the emotions on the way to creating a cost-benefit analysis of solutions. I talked about the SUDS meter, the subjective units of disturbance scale. And I want to point out that there are lots of survival emotions, even love, that can be heightened and create disturbing thoughts. They can turn on upset thinking. On the flip side, upset thinking can turn on the strong survival emotions. I think CJ was alluding to that. When bad things happen, our hearts are racing, our survival thinking goes into place, and if we have a plan, we're more respond in a thoughtful way. But if we are just in survival mode alone with heightened emotions, then our cognition is going to be impaired. Now, some researchers have noted that people who are trying to solve problems, that are dealing with their anger, start realizing that what their signs of temper are, what the red flags are in their own life, so that they can kind of take a step back and get into that lower emotion stage. They can be aware of their anger cycle and can escape from an anger cycle. How many of you have been caught in a cycle of anger that just perpetuates itself? You have a thought, you say something, a person returns with an aggravated comment, so the anger gets higher and higher, and if there are two people or more involved, they just take a tangle and tango back and forth in angry thoughts and angry words, not able to resolve and step out of that anger cycle. However, once people recognize this anger cycle and this arousal cue, this individual arousal cue, they can begin clear thinking. I can remember a story going back to Iran, and even earlier when I was 11, kind of set the stage for my problem solving. I want to tell this story now. When I was 11, my father took my brother and I on a cross-country trip to pick up my mother, who was returning from Australia, and we stopped in Montgomery, Alabama to hear Dr. King speak. He talked about procrastination, and I was pleased enough to shake his hand after the service, and through my father's following his life, he was really one of my heroes. So I looked upon Dr. King's pursuit of nonviolence as a way of solving societal problems as really important. And later on, when I was in Iran, I had a vacation into Afghanistan, and took a minibus ride from the border of Iran through the dark, headed to Herat. And on the bus were some Americans, Europeans, Iranians, Afghans, just a whole melange of people, probably 30 people crammed together. And on the dark road, the driver pulled on the side and then came down the corridor, the middle of the bus, and stopped next to a fellow and went, universal sign of your money or your life. And, we were scared. I was in the back of the bus with people in front of me, and the guy didn't respond. You can imagine, his heart was beating, and he was thinking, what's going to happen? So the driver again did that signal and patted his hand that he wanted some money. And out of the blue, here's my survival thinking. I started singing We Shall Overcome. I remember Dr. King. I remembered singing We Shall Overcome in churches, and people started singing it along with me. We shall overcome. And the bus driver looked and looked, and he didn't understand the words, but he went back to his seat and took us back to where we needed to go, to our hotels. So somehow I was able to rely on some of my peaceful pursuits just to bring it out of the hat. Can't explain it, but wanted to tell that story because I think it has some relevance to people's lives and to what CJ is saying, being prepared. Sometimes we don't know how we're preparing ourselves, but if we're living lives of civility and meeting some good people with strong values, and if we're following a life of, perhaps in my case, nonviolence, that can be a tool to help respond to acts of violence and scary events. Now, you might have noticed on the emotions meter that control knob in the middle, and I'll show you a picture again in just a moment. That's kind of a visual symbol of we have power to turn down the emotions. We can check our emotions vocabulary, and instead of saying I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm calm, I'm mad, we can use some language that discriminates our emotions. So somebody teases me, I'm not necessarily mad, I can use my head. I am disturbed, I'm disappointed, I'm frustrated, but I'm not mad. I'm turning down my emotions and I'm breathing. I'm taking those deep breaths. In my training, I take a deep breath and I hold it for a count of 3 to magnify the effect, and then breathe out again. So I can think about ways of using my vocabulary to put things in perspective. Talked about the no big deal zone and that danger zone. And I don't like it, but I can handle it zone in the middle. You see that knob in the middle, the low to high? So we can visualize we've got the power to take some deep breaths, to use our vocabulary, turn down the emotions. When I was in Isfahan again and nearing the revolution, the electric company was showing support for the Shah, for the Ayatollah, by the way, by turning off the power. And I lived on a 3-story mud and straw house on the outskirts of town. And my friends and I would go up to the roof to appreciate the galaxies. And if you've been in a desert, you just can imagine galaxies and the Milky Way, all those beautiful stars. And one night we were up there and we heard this whoosh, and we wondered what that was. And then we heard this whoosh, and then we saw it. Someone was throwing Molotov cocktails at our front door of this mud and straw 3-story house. And in the distance, I could see on the mud and straw wall that surrounded our house, about a 10-foot high wall, a person straddling the wall with a little can, and he was filling the Molotov cocktails. So I just jumped into the danger zone. I was in full danger, heart beating, what am I going to do zone, react zone. And a few days before, I'd put some curtains over our windows in the alley, just in case somebody was upset and threw rocks. So I put rocks on top of the curtains, and I thought, well, I can put those rocks to good use. And I started throwing them at the guy on the wall, and I could see them going, spinning over his head, luckily. Luckily I didn't hit him, but scared him away. And I thought, after that, if I had some tool to get out of the danger zone, I might not have risked that guy's life and my own by throwing those. But I didn't. I didn't have this skill, and I had to occupy the danger zone and had to think about my survival skills and wonder if somebody was going to come back and try to harm us. But we got through the night okay, and I was in the company of a lot of English teachers. We were teaching English as a second language, and we opened our doors in the morning. We had this really thick wooden door leading outside. I felt like I was living in the Middle Ages in a way. And as we opened the door, we could see on the mud wall opposite, Yankee go home, therefore we kill you quickly. And the English teacher in me was elated. Complex sentence. My job is done. So we had a good laugh. And our neighbors came together and said, Dennis, don't worry. Those were outsiders. Don't worry about it at all. They weren't part of, they don't know you. You're okay. And another side comment I want to make too, just since we're talking a little about that incident. The neighbors all said that that was really an anomaly, that people in Iran are able to discriminate between government representatives and just plain old ordinary people like a teacher or a construction worker. And I like to say that's the truth. That was my experience in Iran. Another short story, my girlfriend and I would go out into the countryside and meet some of the parents of our students. And invariably, they had the best hospitality. There was a phrase they would use. I'm thinking right now of one woman who met us and covered her eye and said, Gorbane Shuma, I am your servant. Come into my humble house and have everything that I have to offer you. So there was a civilization to society in Iran that I don't always see in my own society today. I have to say that there's a tarof, they call it, social skills where people are civilized and laying out the red carpet despite differences. But let me move on from that, just a side story. I didn't want to mislead you into thinking that I felt I was always in the danger zone in Iran. I was in the hospitality zone. So I want to lead you down the path to dealing with some of these heightened emotions and thoughts, and introduce this problem-solving grid that I've used with students and I think might be worth considering. Clear thinking and doing a cost-payoff analysis. Here's a problem that might come up these days. A person might say, I can't stand the liberal world order, this imperialism, and issue the heightened sense of importance of minority rights and women's rights. I want to explode. I want to plan a violent act. So this thinking goes that one must make a choice. And if the choice is to explode and plan a violent act, let's do a cost-benefit analysis. Let's think about right now, this minute, a cost of this kind of plan might be that I get investigated by the police for planning an illegal act. Later today or tomorrow, and this is going into a new zone for people that have high emotions, because most of them live in the here and now. I'm hot and mad and I'm going to do something now, but if we're going to do a cost analysis, we've got to think about later today. And a cost might be that innocent people get hurt by my plan, or I too might get hurt if I'm going to be engaged in violence. Much later, next week, month, and year, I could get caught if I'm on the lam. I could go to prison, and my actions also could be discredited as terrorism. There are more and more stories these days about terrorists who are coming in to civilized society, and they have to live what they have done. They have to somehow make restitution for the violence that they've created. And that's not only within this country, but internationally. I've read stories about people trying to come back into the world because they realize the horrific nature of the deeds they've done. So, okay, that's the cost side. And the payoff side of this kind of thinking would be right now, payoff of making a plan to get even is I will have showed them that this bothers me, that paying attention to minority rights and women's rights is, I hate that, you know, but I want to feel powerful, so I'm going to plan a terrible act. That'll make me feel better right now. Another payoff later today is that my friends would admire me for taking a stand. And then later, next month, maybe next year, my friends and I are in power. We're the ones that have taken control of the world. So this might be some of the thinking that a person with disturbed thoughts or angry thoughts might make. And if they can get out of the right here and the now zone, they might be able to temper their emotions, turn down the hot thinking, and get into the no big deal zone and make a more rational choice to solve problems in a civilized way. These are complex problems that John and CJ and others that have introduced us to. Complex on the individual level for us as individuals to deal with hate and terror, the idea of terror, and certainly at the societal level. This impetus of having this presentation has got me reading quite a bit, and I want to thank the Louisville Public Library for being a civilizing influence for all of us so we can try to understand these problems better. My reading is that multi-part interventions will help give us choices. It's not going to be a simple answer. Some of the reading I've done from conservative sources, just yesterday from the Hoover Institute, surprised me. The writer was saying that our country seems to be caught still in this Bismarck mode of increased weapons, soldiers, strength and power, but we have taken less advantage of the psychological and sociological dimension in trying to bring people together and build relationships and solve problems in civil ways. And for my part, I would say that I choose to stand on the side of love and healthy relationships. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. First two speakers have been talking about how we as individuals can respond to helping someone, helping ourselves. I want to spend a little more time on the social aspects, how large groups or working together with other people might make a difference. And I want to go back to the authoritarianism that we had talked about before. Authoritarians are there to protect the us, and they can be quite nasty if they think it's important enough thing to do to protect the us. And we have studied them since right after World War II. And we always found them to be highly racist. That is, we give them a questionnaire that has lots of different things on it, and it has a racism scale, and they end up highly racist. However, rather recently, we began to think maybe that's not quite it. So I want to share with you an experiment that would lead us to think this. In that experiment, the subjects were white, non-Hispanic, divided into two sets. Set A hears the message that NASA, the Space Administration, finds no evidence of aliens from outer space. They're not there. Set B hears that NASA has found conclusive proof of aliens. Now we really know they're there. Then they did the racial prejudice scale again for each one, for each set, and the authoritarians, there would be authoritarians in each set, as well as non-authoritarians in each set. And the authoritarians in set A express a normal level of prejudice. That is, there's no evidence of aliens, and they're still highly racist. The authoritarians from set B, the racism greatly decreases. Much less prejudice. Why would that be? Here we have in set B, there really are aliens out there. Maybe some of them look like the movie Alien or something, who knows? Can you see what's happening? They are what? Widening the us, right? They're widening the us. That any human being is better than the aliens, so we'll all work together to protect ourselves from the aliens. This is about the only way to really get through strong authoritarians. A college education will level their authoritarianism just a little bit, bring it just a little bit down. But widening the us makes a big difference. This is relevant to you and your family too, because there's very few of us who don't have some authoritarian somewhere in the family, and you just can't argue with them very well because they're taking a very different point of view, because they're defending something different. They're sure that the rather narrow us that they envision in their mind is what they need to be defending. But widening the us by reversing the curse of Ham. Way back when, in the late 1700s, Eli Whitney comes up with this cotton gin. Very simple little machine, but it took a great deal less labor to process that cotton with this little machine. And American cotton was waning by then. It wasn't competing well with Egyptian cotton. You know, to go to the British textile mills, not our own, of course. And when the cotton gin came in, that made American cotton much more competitive. It made the abolitionist job a whole lot more difficult because the South responded, particularly through its religious leaders, with the idea of the curse of Ham. It's a claim in the Bible that they think they got in the Bible that provides legitimation of slavery of blacks, because Ham was supposedly black and all blacks were cursed by God because Ham saw Noah. Now, we don't even want to go into what that means. Okay. Up to about the 1980s, we begin to see a change in that. It's rather interesting. 1980s to present, your right-wing Christians, not all of them by a long shot, but many more of them than you might suspect, have decided, no, that was a misinterpretation of that story in the Bible. The curse wasn't really on Ham, so, all people are God's children, so to speak. But a recent document came out this year, and there's its title, On Renouncing the Doctrine of the Curse of Ham as a Justification for Racism. This was a resolution by the Southern Baptist Convention. Are we widening the us or what here? Okay? This is really, I think, a significant change. This month, Daniel Darling has published The Dignity Revolution. He's a Baptist minister, I believe, and it is to suggest that Christians should recognize all human beings as having dignity and treat them as such. And I think it's making quite a stir amongst those folks who hadn't quite come around yet. So my thought here is that by expanding the us, we really can change how we deal with things. It won't be just the non-authoritarians knocking their heads against the wall trying to get social change. They can pick up some from some other folks as well. There'd be less resistance. Now there's another thing I want to note that it's not all good news. There's still some on the far right who warn of convergence. Right now, the big baddie is Antifa, Marxists, and Islamists, who are all Muslims. Every Muslim is an Islamist, which is total nonsense. And that's called the red-green axis. And by golly, they're out there fighting that. So the fight's not over, but there is some hope there. And widening the us is a way to deal with things. Now, you might wonder why I have a scene of Jonestown here. November 18th, 1978, at the Jonestown settlement in Guyana, 909 Americans died after willingly and in some cases forced to poison themselves. And the question I have for you is, would you drink the Kool-Aid? And more people than you think would. As a matter of fact, I suspect many of you already have. It just didn't involve killing somebody or killing yourself. That is, we are creatures who relate to each other and pick up information from each other and back and forth create our understanding of what is right and wrong and what the world is about. It's called the social construction of reality. Now, lots of folks can't live with that, and certainly the alt-right can't. Well, you can't make up reality. What are you talking about? But this is a shortening of what really should be the phrase. It should be the social construction of perceived reality. Humans can, under the right conditions, believe anything. There's nothing too dumb that some of us hadn't gone to. Trepanation comes to mind. You're not feeling well? We drill a hole in your head about 1 inch round with no anesthetic and let the foo-foo come out, and then you'll be better. And you ask a person after that's happened, are you? Well, yeah, I'm better. You know, I think you better be. You know, it's called in psychology cognitive dissonance. You went through all that. You, oh yeah, I feel better. We will believe anything. We have approximately 20 million people in a cult in the United States at any one time. That's according to Detective Snow from the retired now from the Indianapolis Police Department, in his book, Deadly Cults. A lot of people are being snookered. A cult changes how you think about the world, yourself, and your willingness to do something for a leader. If all those things are there, but there's no willingness to do something for a leader and that the leader is exploiting you even though you don't know it. If there's none of that, it's not really a cult. You know, when you go to boot camp in the military, you're going to really change the way you think about the world and what you do. But it's not cult. You're being prepared to survive and do your job. And you all have to work together to do that. But we've got a lot of cults. Most of them are religious in kind. My point is, you don't have to be in a total cult to believe some kind of horrid idea and carry it out. I want to look at lynching now for just a moment. Directed principally at blacks, was a form of social control. How do we keep them in line? That was not just supposed justice. Well, they did something wrong, so we're going to teach them. No, that was secondary at best. It's a form of justice administered in just individual cases. No, it was for a lot of folks to know. It was also a form of terrorism. So everyone would know. The whole entire category class that was terrorized would be warned with every terrorist act that they too could be a victim if they did not obey every norm and act submissively on every occasion of interaction with whites. And the record is clear. It was certainly there. We have a lot of evidence, including photographic evidence, This stuff was going on up into the 30s. The woman on the right, in the front there, with her Klan robes and so on. It's hard to see. I've got such a bad picture there. She's smiling. These were great occasions. Sometimes they'd be advertised in newspapers for several days ahead, and everyone would show up. It'd be a great event. Then the victim would be tortured, then killed, usually by hanging, maybe sometimes stabbing, and then the body mutilated afterwards was not uncommon. The children would be brought to show what this world is all about and how you have to handle yourself. The person who is hung may not even have done anything. These are kangaroo courts. All somebody has to say is so-and-so did that, as well as being white. So if a white person accused a black person, end of story, you could be murdered. If you couldn't be found, then how about your wife or kids? Now, where's the terrorism? Sometimes it's in us. You have to be careful. These people who are attending these hangings, these lynchings, were not really bad people, but they had talked themselves into doing horrible things. A lady who worked very, very hard to get rid of this, Ida B. Wells, as a crusading journalist. He contributed greatly to getting the laws set up. That doesn't mean it still doesn't happen. It still happens. You don't get generally the great groups of people coming. This is done more by individuals with only a few people present today. But we had a time when it meant something different to us than today. I wanted to just, we've got to pull it quits here, but I just wanted, while I'm at this, talk a moment about the birth of the nation. Birth of a Nation. It was a film that was released in 1915, followed by massive race riots throughout the country, peaking especially in the North in 1919.
Who was rioting? Whites or?
Whites were rioting against blacks because the movie said to do that, in effect. Because you had scenes of a guy in blackface chasing a white girl until, she's so scared she's going to be raped. She jumps over off a cliff and is killed, and we've got to defend white people. Geez, that's not gone, is it? We've still got that. And the center is a actual scene that the two on each side are posters advertising it, but the scene from it with all these Klansmen riding was from the show. And of course, it got a lot of people worked up. Many historians laid the blame for this racial conflict on the film. It was the most technically advanced film of its time. Much longer, 3 hours. Usually films are like 20 minutes or so. 1915, okay? And with many more cuts and scenes than films had used up to this time. So the audiences flocked to see it for its technical achievements as well as its content. You can believe there were a lot of white folks who saw that. Just as an aside, anybody know where its director and technical innovator, David Wark Griffin, was born? Yeah, LaGrange, Kentucky, I think. All right, folks.